I'm going all out for this video. I'm in like my Twilight core flannel shirt, and I have been listening to the Twilight Effect podcast with Ashley Green and Melanie Howe. It is so cool. If you have not listened to this podcast yet, you absolutely have to check it out. They've been getting like all of the actors and directors and producers of the series to just like talk about their experience with Twilight. It is so good. It's all hosted by our very own Alice Cullen. It is amazing. But that is not what I'm here to talk about. I am here to give you some book recommendations because, as we all know, there's been a bit of a resurgence and uptake in Twilight content recently. On TikTok, it's being called the Twilight Renaissance. And as we know, when you come out of a big Twilight binge or Twilight phase in your life, you don't want the magic to stop there. You want it to continue. And so I am here to give you some book recommendations that still have that same like Twilight vibe, like that angsty, eternal love, like just really tense romantic vibes. First up, we have Letters to the Lost by Brigid Kemmerer. This is literally my favorite book I read this year. It totally has those like angsty teen vibes that you want from a Twilight-esque story. It literally has the most angsty opening scene ever. We start in a graveyard and our main character is writing a letter to her mother, whom she has recently lost, and this has become kind of a coping mechanism for her, where she visits the cemetery where her mother was buried and she leaves these letters about her feelings, about what she's struggling with, and she just kind of leaves them there for her mom. But the next day, when she comes back, she discovers that someone has actually read her letter and responded to it. Now, this is not a paranormal story, so it's not like her mother's ghost coming back from the grave or anything like that. It turns out that the person who responded is actually one of the groundskeepers at the cemetery. And not only that, but he also is a student at her high school who is serving out his community service on a like criminal sentence. Eventually they move on to exchanging email addresses. They are just going back and forth, completely just pouring their hearts out to each other, helping each other deal with their traumas in life, with their grief. They've both just recently lost someone in their life, but in real life, they can't stand each other. Everybody thinks he's just like a jerk, and he thinks she's kind of like stuck up and shallow, but they have no idea that they're actually falling in love with each other through these emails. And oh my gosh, at one point, one of them finds out about who the other is. And so like for half of the book, you're reading it from the perspective of one of them who knows that the other one is who they are in real life, whereas the other one has no idea who they're writing to on the other hand. And so it's like the tension of like, do I tell them who I am? Do I keep it a secret? How long can we keep this going? I don't want this to end. Oh, it's so good. Okay, so backing it up now, we're going to an English literature classic, and that is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Now, in the Twilight series, Bella is described as being a bit of a bookworm, and she has a taste for the classics. So her favorite all-time, like hands down favorite book in the whole wide world is Wuthering Heights. And the great thing about this is that even if this book was never mentioned in Twilight specifically, it would still be a great recommendation because the parallels. This is like the original angsty teen romance. We have these two people, Kathy and Heathcliff, and they are like absolute soulmates, like made for each other. The stars aligned. They are one and the same. They actually, like, one of the most iconic romantic quotes in all of literature is about their relationship, and it is when Kathy is talking about Heathcliff. She says, "He's more myself than I am. Whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same. And people quote this all the time, but their relationship is also tumultuous, to say the very least. And so Kathy decides to marry this other guy who she believes is kind of the safer option, who can give her a more stable life. And that's really the big question in Twilight as well when it comes to the love triangle, is like, does Bella go for the like love to end all loves, like crazy, angsty, intense romance? Or does she pick Jacob and have like basically a normal human life? He's kind of like the safe bet. So that's the question that she's grappling with basically through like the whole series until Breaking Dawn. And it is very much the same with Wuthering Heights, except whereas in Eclipse, Edward did say that if she were to choose Jacob, he would like bow out gracefully and like let her be happy. That is not the case in Wuthering Heights. Heathcliff becomes very vengeful, very vindictive, and basically by the end of the book goes insane because of his love for Kathy and the fact that he didn't get to spend his life with her, and he starts like seeing ghosts of her. Definitely going into it, you should know that it's pretty dark. For a classic, it's actually quite violent, and it's just overall very heavy. But at the same time, a lot of people also consider this to be like literally the best novel written in the English language, like in history. So there you go. Okay, next up we have a book that is so adorably wholesome and is also my favorite, maybe my favorite book from last year. Fake Blood by Whitney Gardner. It is a graphic novel, as you can see, and it is basically about this boy in middle school who gets a crush on this girl in his class, and she is like obsessed with vampires. That's like her favorite thing. And he's super shy. He wants to tell her how he feels, but he doesn't know how. So naturally, he pretends to be a vampire. And it is so adorable. He like puts like eyeshadow under his eyes to make it look like he hasn't slept, and he like tussles up his hair, and just all the different things he does to try and convince her that he's a vampire so that she will take interest in him. And so obviously this is not the best idea to begin with, but it turns out they discover through all of this that there might actually be a real vampire in their midst. So obviously all of that makes it a really great choice for fans of Twilight, but specifically if you consider yourself to be like a next level fan, like a true Twi-hard, this is such a fun book to read, because sprinkled all throughout the book there are these little references and puns related to Twilight. And so if you are someone who will like pick up on those tiny details, it just makes it that much more entertaining. So like, for example, instead of it being set in like Forks, Washington, the name of the middle school is Spoons Middle School. Or another example, so when our main character is like doing research and like trying to learn more about what vampires are like, he sneaks into his sister's room and takes a copy of a like Twilight knockoff basically called Moonlight, and you see it there. It like obviously looks the exact same as the cover, and it is so hilarious, and we get to see a few scenes from that book, and particularly this one that just absolutely cracked me up was the scene where Edward, or like knockoff Edward, is showing his skin for the first time and how it like sparkles, and we get this amazing shot. Amazing, amazing. It just like, when I turned the page and saw that, I just lost it. It was just too cute. This next book is actually one of a series, and I am convinced that this could have been Twilight. Like, this could have had the impact on the world that Twilight had if it had been picked up and turned into a movie, and that is Shiver by Maggie Stiefvater. This is basically like Twilight, but without the love triangle. So if you're someone, I mean, personally, I am like an unashamed fan of love triangles, but I know a lot of people don't really like that trope. So if that is you, you absolutely have to pick up Shiver by Maggie Stiefvater. So this story is about Grace, and she is living up, I believe, in Michigan. Like, it's not Pacific Northwest, but it's still like those cozy, woodsy, autumnal vibes. It's very aesthetic. And so we get a glimpse of her childhood in the beginning of the story, where she basically was like attacked by this pack of wolves and mysteriously survived, and nobody really knows how, because she like honestly shouldn't have survived, but she did. And so as she's grown up and her house is like positioned near the woods where these wolves live, she, instead of like growing to be afraid of the wolves, which 100% is what I would do, she actually develops this like really intense interest in the wolf pack. And so she's constantly just like watching them, observing them from afar. And there's one wolf in particular with, she describes these like really striking yellow eyes. And this wolf, she just has a particular interest in, and he seems to have a particular interest in her. Like, at times he will like approach her outside of the pack, you know, like by himself, and they'll have these like kind of weird interactions, and she doesn't really know what to make of all this until one day this boy shows up on her doorstep, and it turns out that he's the wolf. I don't know, I think technically this would not be classified in like a strict mythological sense. This would not be classified as a werewolf, because I'm pretty sure in order to be a werewolf, you have to like change according to the moon. So this is something kind of similar to that, but the wolves basically change according to the seasons. And so what we learn from Sam's perspective, Sam is the wolf, we learn the warm months of the year, so spring and summer, they get to spend as people. But then in the fall and the winter, during the colder months, they transition into wolves, and there's like nothing they can do about it. They can't like control it. And so they basically get to spend half of their lives as humans and half as werewolves until they reach a certain age of like maturity. And it's kind of different for every wolf, but it tends to be in like your 20s or 30s, and then you're just completely wolf like all of the time, and you basically like forget about your human life. So basically when Sam turns at like the beginning of the spring, he winds up at Grace's house, and Grace is kind of just like trying to navigate this new situation, and they fall so hard for each other. But then you have like the impending doom of like him eventually having to turn back into a wolf. And so it's like they're falling in love with each other, but they have no idea how they can make that work, because eventually he's not even gonna be human anymore. And it just, oh, it hits you right in the heart. It hits you in the heart. Oh my gosh, but it is just so good. And I have not finished the series yet. This is one of the series I am most looking forward to hopefully continuing this fall. I really wanted to save it for the fall because it's just so atmospheric and cozy. The audiobook for this one is really, really good. There's like different narrators for the different characters, and they just do a really good job of capturing their voices, and oh my gosh, it is just amazing. And then lastly, we actually have a book that I have not read yet, but I would say is definitely one of my most anticipated reads of the year, and that is Wild is the Witch by Rachel Griffin. This is a companion novel to The Nature of Witches, which came out last year. I also haven't read that one, but I do own it and I intend to read it. I've heard great things. But the reason that I wanted to recommend this one specifically is because in the like announcement for the book before it was published, one of the specific things that the author talked about was the fact that it was going to have Pacific Northwest vibes. So I'm feeling like this person is probably a Twilight fan and like knew her audience. I'm just guessing, I don't know that for sure. So I wanted to read you the synopsis. It says, when 18-year-old witch Iris Grey accidentally enacts a curse that could have dire consequences, she must team up with a boy who hates witches to make sure her magic isn't unleashed on the world. Iris Grey knows witches aren't welcome in most towns. When she was forced to leave her last home, she left behind a father who was no longer willing to start over. And while the Witches' Council was lenient in their punishment, Iris knows they're keeping tabs on her. Now settled in Washington, Iris never lets anyone see who she really is. Instead, she vents her frustrations by writing curses she never intends to cast. Otherwise, she spends her days at the wildlife refuge, which would be the perfect job if not for Pike Alder, the witch-hating aspiring ornithologist who interns with them. Iris concocts the perfect curse for Pike, one that will turn him into a witch. But just as she's about to dispel it, a bird swoops down and steals the curse before flying away. If the bird dies, the curse will be unleashed, and the bird is a powerful amplifier, and unleashing the curse would turn not just Pike, but everyone in the region into a witch. New witches have no idea how to control their magic, and the consequences would be dire. And the Witches' Council does not look kindly on multiple offenses. If they found out, Iris could be stripped of her magic for good. Iris begs Pike to help her track the bird, and they set out on a trek through the Pacific Northwest looking for a single bird that could destroy everything. So basically, we're getting super nature vibes, we're getting paranormal romance, we're getting enemies to lovers, and the author said that this also has a take on the like one bed trope, and that is the one tent trope. So I'm super excited. It immediately reminded me of the tent scene in Eclipse where Jacob and Edward like have their big like confrontation discussion while Bella is basically freezing. So just like, oh my goodness, that is all for me. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if there's any way I can be encouraging you or praying for you this week. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Bye.